This video is sponsored by Big Boy Gaming. Follow the link in the description below for all of your card gaming needs.
What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the Edison Club. On today's episode, I am bringing you a video kind of breaking down this video that Paks TCG made about a month ago. Title of the video is Why You Can't Win in Yu-Gi-Oh! So we're kind of going to watch the video together, go over it and analyze kind of what he's saying, kind of break it down, and see how it relates to one of my podcast episodes, which the title of that podcast episode is called This Episode Will Make You Good at Yu-Gi-Oh! So we're going to kind of go through all of that today. Go through the video. I'm going to play it at 1.5 speed, so maybe this video won't drawn on for too long. But as always, guys, before we get started, please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe. Really just motivates me to keep going, getting better at the game, as well as content creation. Also, while you're subscribing to me, head on over to Paks' channel, that's P-A-K, and give him a subscribe for his excellent video as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into Paks' video of why you can't win at Yu-Gi-Oh! We're going to kind of stop this every now and again and kind of just go over and kind of talk about what he's saying here.
Hey, what's up, guys? So as you can see from the video title, I wanted to talk about why you're not winning in Yu-Gi-Oh! Before you get a little defensive as if I'm attacking you, I think the whole point of this video is going to talk about the lessons I learned the way to finally doing well at premier events. Let's start from the beginning, right? I think we can all agree that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a pretty tough game. It has evolved a lot from like the playground Yu-Gi-Oh! That you all know and love. And I remember even myself, my story is that I got into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! 3 to 4 months after picking up the game towards the end of 2019 to like about the start of 2020. And
the fact that Paks has only played since 2019, or I guess he says kind of like 2020, and he is so accomplished is actually insane. So like anyone I feel like that watches this video and says like, oh, this is just cap, this isn't true, like you're just refusing to just like listen and like accept that sometimes in Yu-Gi-Oh! You're the person that's holding yourself back. Like it's your fault. You're holding yourself back. You can't get to where you need to be because of your mentality. Like this man has only played Yu-Gi-Oh! For like 5 years, and he's done more than I have done in 20 years of playing. So this video, I'm telling you, is one of the best tools to help you improve at Yu-Gi-Oh! That's actually ever been filmed ever.
honestly, it was really hard for a newer player to understand like all the different summoning mechanics, all the different rulings, interactions, what it means to properly sequence your cards, technical play, making the right reads. It was impossible. I even remembered being so overwhelmed that I actually looked up a CMO video on how to link summon because I bought 3 Salmon Grade structure decks and I was like, dude, what are these blue monsters? Like, how do I summon them, right? I quickly found out that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a pretty tough game. Definitely not easy. It turns out there's a pretty big difference between just throwing cards on the table and playing your cards with purpose. So when Rise...
Yeah, this is something that's so important. And throughout the course of this video, he's kind of found ways to put things into words that I couldn't figure out how to phrase correctly. And playing your cards with purpose is so important. So like a year ago, when I was first like trying to break down the walls and break down the barriers to improve at Yu-Gi-Oh!, a lot of times I would just play cards to just play cards. People would ask me, oh, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And I'd be like, oh, I don't know. Like, I just played the card. I thought it was good. I didn't actually have real reasonings for like why I was playing my cards. I was just playing them. Like I wasn't playing them with a purpose. So when you start playing cards with a purpose, it really starts to change your whole mentality on how to just navigate certain hands and how to navigate the matchup.
to start resuming after COVID in 2022. I was really excited to travel to my first person YCS. I've only been to one other YCS at the time, which was YCS Vegas with Steven and Sam, but I never been to a solo YCS, in-person YCS. Like I never performed at one, or played at one. And if you guys were following me at the time, you would know that the first 5 YCSs I attended, I didn't perform. I kept bubbling, I kept losing, and there was a multitude of factors, but it would be shameful of me to say that I didn't do well because of I just bricked or my opponent stacked me or all these other reasons. I think me being the type of person I am, I started to find the reasons why, and I think that shift in mindset is how I was able to perform. And I think for most people,
yeah, this is so important because not so long ago I found myself in the mentality of I got sacked, I bricked, this deck's bad, my opponent got super lucky, instead of actually like being accountable and trying to figure out the real reason why I lost. Did I really truthfully get sacked? Because sometimes there would be times where like I would miss lethal and it would be something so small as like stack for Plague Spreader, summon it in attack position. I would leave them at like 200, 300, 400 life. They would come back and kill me and I'd be like, oh, I got sacked. My opponent sacked me. You know, like he's a sorry sacker. And in reality, I threw the game because I had it. I had it on the silver platter. I just chose not to take it. I misplayed and I wasn't holding myself accountable for those losses rather than just like pinning it on someone else or some like third party thing, like it was just luck or whatever. It was his day. And in reality, it was just my inability to take accountability for my own actions.
When they're in that predicament, in that situation, when they don't perform the first 5 premier events they attended, they probably would have stopped because of the stinking time, money. Man, when you don't see results, it's easy to get discouraged. But I shifted my mindset and I really look back into like what has changed. Like how did I like start to perform? And I'll say the first piece is like determining if the games you're losing are within your control and be honest with yourself. So
this is so important. On Dueling Book, you have the luxury of going back and watching your replays, which I don't play on Dueling Book a lot. I do prefer to play in person. That's just kind of how I am. But whenever I do play on Dueling Book, I always go back and watch the replay. Whether I win or lose, there's almost always something that I learn when I go back and watch that analysis again. Maybe it's something, maybe I gave him an extra turn. I didn't see a line for lethal. Or maybe because I lost, maybe it was because I didn't make a push when I should have, or maybe I made a bad read. And being honest with yourself is just so important. It's so important, guys. Like, you can always say like you can fix yourself, but you can't fix the deck. So like if I'm wanting to go back and play like Morphtronics, right? And I'm playing Morphtronics and I keep losing, Morphtronics isn't a good deck. There's nothing that I can ever do that's ever going to make Morphtronics the best deck of Edison format, right? So that's like an example of like it's out of your control. You can't fix it because your deck is so weak. If I'm playing Blackwings and I keep losing, and let's say I lose to Morphtronics, well, I'm obviously doing something wrong. Like, obviously, Yu-Gi-Oh! Does have a luck factor, just like all card games. There can be times where you do get lucked out of the game. Your opponent draws a brain control, or you have to, like, make a push turn, and they do have the Mirror Force, stuff like that. But Blackwing is a tier 1 deck, so if you're losing with it, it's not the deck's fault, it's the player. You can always fix the player. You can always get better at the game. Oops.
I remember that people come up to me at YCSs, they would say, hey, what's up, Pack? How are you? I'll be like, I'm doing good. I'm like, how are you doing in the tournament? They're like, yeah, I'm X2, bro, X3. Like, I'm not doing too good. And they would always go on a rant about how they lost, right? Your friends probably do this to you too. Right within like the first couple minutes of hearing the story, I could tell right away if they're capping, or if they actually could have played better. And I'm guilty of it too. I mean, at the end of the day, right, it can be quite embarrassing to tell your friends, content creators you look up to, that you punted, that you misplayed, or all those things. But at some point, the lies you keep telling others and yourself almost make it to a point where they're self-fulfilling. You will actually start believing that you couldn't have played better, that you could not have sequenced your hand better, or like you could not.
And this can be a mindset that's very toxic. It doesn't matter what format you play, whether it's GOAT, Edison, Tengu, Hat, Modern, whatever. The accountability and realizing why you lost goes such a long way.
Have made a better read on the back row, right? And I think when you do this, it can be pretty detrimental to your growth as a player. A good anecdotal story of this is I remember at YCS Charlie, I played a good friend of mine, Christian Reyna on the bubble, G, and I lost because I didn't ash his Phantasme, and he ended up drawing Nibiru off the Phantasme, which actually ended the game and my tournament run, and as stupid as I was, like I don't know what possessed me to not do it at the time, but it was clearly a mistake, and I quickly realized it after the match when I got Nibiru. I'm like, wait a second, did you draw that Nibiru off of Phantasme? I'm like, what did I hold ash for? Like I was going for game. I should have just asked Phantasme, right? And like it's that kind of like critical thinking, that reflection that made you realize like, okay, wait a second, I am not going to top this YCS because of this mistake I made, right? And admitting those gives me comfort that I could play better. Like that is critical to growth, right? So,
and like most people too, like if you admit the mistake to yourself, like when I make a mistake, I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can to literally never let that mistake happen again. Like I find myself, normally, I feel like most of my matches now, my misplays are very minimal, right? But when I get put into a situation I've never been put in before, like for example, I played against Pure Fairies at YCS Richmond in November, I almost lost. And it was just because I had never played against Pure Fairies before. I had never had like what we would call reps against Pure Fairies. I would get put into situations I hadn't been in before. And luckily, like just knowing the fundamentals of the game were enough to get me through that match. Because that's how I am. Like sometimes I'll make a really stupid mistake and then I'll say to myself like, okay, well, I've done it once. So now I know that I will literally never do that again. And that has really helped me a lot as well.
And it's also important to note that like these small mistakes you like make at these like within these rounds, maybe I was X1 at the time and I made this mistake against the other, and now I'm X2, I'm still in the tournament, but it's important to note that like these small mistakes have ripple effects. That one match you lost can like change your whole tournament drastically, right? Yeah, that's kind of like how I got better, because even if I do like a lot of self-reflection in between these games, and even after Josh and I played our feature match at YCS Bologna, I remember he and I chatted in Top Cut and we were like, Josh was like, hey, I could have played better, and I told him like, hey, I could have played better too. And it was so crazy because that like,
while note taking in Yu-Gi-Oh in most cases you can't take notes outside of like life and tracking and mandatory effects. I always take notes after the game has concluded if I lose the game. Like, why did I lose this game? Was it truthfully a case of like, I bricked and there really was nothing that I could do? Like, if I open up like double JD, Christia, triple recharge, and I get OTK'd by Dragon Turbo, then that just kind of is what it is. You know, Yu-Gi-Oh, you're going to brick. It doesn't matter what deck you play. Eventually, you're going to brick. And, or was it something like, maybe there was a mistake. Maybe I didn't summon the Plague Spreader and I gave them another turn and they came back and beat me. It's very important to know why you lost. And honestly, I think it can be important to know why you won as well. Because like sometimes just because you won doesn't necessarily mean that it was a good win. Like, this would be a case where I'd say like, if you play that same match 90 or 100 times, you might only get lucky 50 of those times, right? Like you might have got lucky, made a bad read, got rewarded for it this time, but the next time it comes around to it, you may not get so lucky.
Like really goes to show that, you know, like how the top players think. Always trying to figure out like, okay, like even though he like Josh won our match, like he was even like, wait, hold up, I didn't actually play the best I did. And I think like that type of like critical thinking is really, really important. That's the first aspect, admitting to mistakes and improving and learning from them. The second piece is
100%.
learning how to play Yu-Gi-Oh is more important than learning how to play a specific deck. If you think about it, the reason why
this right here was the reason why I wanted to make this video. In my podcast, I talk about learning the fundamentals of Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you want to go back and listen to that episode, I'll have it linked in the description below. I go over and basically quote like a lot of these really big name players, like a True Hero, Cameron Saunders, Fraser Smith. Like it just goes on and on and on. I quote like 10 or 15 different people throughout the course of that podcast, all about like the fundamentals of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like knowing how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to take you further than just knowing how to play a deck. So like a lot of times people will tell me like, oh, I struggle in the mirror match, right? Like I can't win the mirror. And sometimes it's because the person that's struggling only knows how to play the deck. They don't know how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And that was something I couldn't really learn how to put into words until I watched this video and I heard him say, you need to like know the difference in knowing how to play a deck and knowing how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because knowing how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! It really is like the game inside the game, the rulings, the card interactions, all of this stuff. Like it's so important. I'll give you a quick story here. I went to my first Tengu Plant tournament about a month ago. And mind you, I didn't put in a ton of testing into going into Tengu format. I played just a few games with it. I was playing Gravekeepers. It's one of my favorite archetypes. I got married and went on my honeymoon and everything. So I really didn't have time to test for this tournament. But I did well. I got third place. And a lot of the reasons why I got third place at that tournament was because even though I was inexperienced with Gravekeeper, mind you, a deck that's significantly different than Christia Sworn and Edison format, I knew the fundamentals of how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And not just how to play the deck. So that really took me a long way, like knowing when to change the game state, when to make my opponent change the game state, like when to match their tempo. Like if they're just setting cards, like I can freely just keep setting spies and just wait. Stuff like that, like knowing when to push. It's just so important, and it's really going to help you so much along the way.
I am able to consistently switch decks for every YCS and play them at a very high level is because I believe that mastering the fundamentals of Yu-Gi-Oh! Will give you a lot more mileage for your time. I will definitely concede the fact that it will take a lot more time if you're a newer player because there's a lot to learn in the beginning, like understanding how chain links work, understanding what turn player priority means, understanding like...
This kind of goes back to what I said about like getting the reps in and like the repetition, like playing like 100 games against the same deck over a course of, you know, a month or 2 months, whatever, and just kind of recognizing the situations that you've been put in. And then, you know, every time you get put in it, you start to like realize like a better way to navigate it or the best way to navigate that situation you're put in.
Like rulings, interactions, like understanding all these things that have nothing to do with your deck. Understanding turn player priority, understanding that on resolution you have priority to activate a fast effect. Like these are things that have nothing to do if you're playing an Unchained deck, if you're playing like a virtual deck, if you're playing a Pearly deck. These have nothing to do.
Here's an example. I played against my friend Kyle. Kyle plays Black Wings and Edison. He's a very good Black Wing player. But in Tengu format, he was playing TG Stun. So he was going for a line when TGs, where basically he has TG Striker and Reborn Tengu on the field. So he goes synchro these two, make Brio, and all I have is a set spy. And I'm at like 2,000. So knowing the rulings and interactions, I know that he cannot priority on Brianak because Reborn Tengu is going to trigger first. The same way as like Brio and Goblin Zombie in Edison format. So I chained my Book of Moon to his Reborn Tengu and booked his Brionac, and I ended up winning the game because I knew that interaction. And I knew how that worked, that he wouldn't be able to use priority. That's why I won the game. The fundamentals of Yu-Gi-Oh! Won me that game, knowing the rulings and knowing the interactions.
With those decks, it's about the game itself. And I think understanding the game at its core is much more important, because then you can like apply those fundamentals to multitudes of decks, right? Like understanding how the damage step works, like understanding how trigger effects works, and using that to your advantage. Those type of things about Yu-Gi-Oh! About
for a long time in Edison format, I didn't know that you could do honest in the damage step, or you could do honest in damage calculation. So sometimes when you play against players that are a little inexperienced, you can say like let's say you're playing a mirror, right? And they go like, Wolf attacked my Lila. And I'll be like, damage step, and they'll drop honest. And I'm like, okay, damage cow, I will honest. And you win like the honest battle there. Knowing like how that works is really important. Kind of the same thing goes with Kalut too.
Fundamentals of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, in my opinion, much more important to learn than just learning like there's like the memorizing a combo, because the truth of the matter is that like memorizing combos will not take you far, because it never actually works that way in a tournament. You will get hand trapped, you will get stopped, your opponent will interact with you. This game is not solitaire, and so as a result, like, these combos that like people show off and like the spreadsheets and all that stuff, well, they're important to know, but you need to understand like why they work, how they work, instead of memorizing how they're being performed. I will say like they're one of the reasons why
like you need to know why all of the cards in your deck are in your deck. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with going to Format Library and downloading the newest Blackwing deck and playing it, but you might find yourself in situations where like you don't know how to side properly, you don't know what to side for what matchup, and you don't know what to take out, things like that. You need to know like why all the cards in your main side and extra exist within your deck.
Like some players who've been playing forever are leagues ahead is because they've experienced a lot of like these rulings, these interactions, like how all these things work, all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fundamentals. They learned that way earlier on. If you look at some of my first streams when I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! It was actually me grinding Dueling Book, watching back my replays. I did this for months until I became really good at adapting to like the different game state, and all the experiences, all the lessons you learn from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Not playing specific deck, playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Will develop to what I call like this Yu-Gi-Oh! Game sense, right? Like other games would call this like game sense. I call this like your Yu-Gi-Oh! Game sense, like that kind of like being able to navigate game states or like make reads, all that kind of stuff, right? And I would say like Jesse is a really good example of this, right? Like he's refined his fundamentals and technical plays over the years to where he does not need to practice as much or play as much in order to do all YCSs. Like I have personally tested with Jesse, and all he does is theory. Like he doesn't even play. Like
I kind of feel the same way here. While I will say I feel like there's no amount of theorio that will take you as far as like raw playing. Eventually, you kind of do get to a point where like you can kind of theory your deck a little bit, because you played so many games, you played so many matches. I don't even know how many games I've played with Christius Warren at this point. Like I can look at my list and basically be able to change up 2 or 3 cards and know that like the 3 cards I changed don't change the way the other 37, 38 cards in this deck function. And that's really important too.
It came to the point where Jesse just pulls up to a YCS and just cooks people because of the game sense he develops from years of practice. I think for someone like myself, if you're a newer player, if you're someone looking to get better and get to that level, you're gonna have to work a little bit harder. He's been doing it since he was like 15, right? And that's what I kind of like did when I first started, like at like start of 2020, end of 2019. That's kind of like what I did. I had to play more than others. Like I had to be on Dueling, but I had to like, because I need to make up the in time by getting more experience. Like for that lack of time that I don't have playing the game, I need more experience, and the only way.
I always thought that for me, like I quit modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it just got to be way too much for me, and I kind of thought that like I was just bad at it, and I never knew how to improve. And now that I actually know how to improve, I've told people like I feel like if I really gave a crap about advanced format, I could come back into the game, and I actually feel like I could have a lot of success in the game, because I know now what it takes to actually be good. And it would be like having a part-time job, because you're going to have to be on Dueling Book every day, playing every day, watching replays, playing against the best players. And that will be eventually how you end up getting better. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. Like sometimes people would say like, oh, this guy, he has natural talent. Like that's why he's good at the game. Well, that's fine if you have natural talent, but hard work will always take you further than natural talent. The harder you work, the more time you put in, the better that you're going to become. Inevitably, as long as you're doing all of these things, you're taking accountability for your losses. You're not putting it on a third party saying I got sacked, saying that I just bricked, there's nothing I could do, I couldn't have played better, I played perfectly. The more accountable you can be, the better you're going to do in the long run.
to get more experience is to play more and play critically, right? Because you could play the game but not feel anything, right? Like you could mindlessly like I put cards on the table, do this, do that, like set a couple stuff. When you play and you're trying to improve, you should always be critically thinking about, okay, how should I sequence my hand in order to play around Droll and Lockbird, because I know that's a very common card in the format. If that's the case, should I start with this normal summon? But does that expose me to Valor and Imperm? Does that even matter? Like, do I lose those 2 cards anyways? Should I just start with the most powerful normal summon? You know, these are things that should be going through the back of your head. If you're looking to get better at the game, there's like no shortcut. Reading about how like a deck works is not going to help you get there. Like, you're going to need that game experience, right? How many people at a YCS play like the tier 1 deck? How many people play Rescue Waves? Why is it so few making top cut? Why is it like the same players making top cut? It's because like you could be playing the same deck as someone else, but you could be playing it so different, it's not even close. Like one person looks like a surgeon, the other guy looks like a first year nurse. The third piece I wanted to cover.
I was so guilty of this too. I'd be like, I'd build like the YCS winning deck and couldn't win locals with it. And I'd be like, oh, that guy's cheating. That's why he did well. He's totally a cheater. You know, he's just lucky, whatever. When in reality, they just had infinite more seat time than I did with the deck. And that was a hard realization to come to as well, because I spent a long time kind of beating myself up and just feeling like I wasn't good enough. And in reality, even like the time I did put into Yu-Gi-Oh, it wasn't enough. I needed to like quadruple the amount of time that I was putting into Yu-Gi-Oh, at least when I was playing advanced format. So like becoming good at Edison format taught me like all of the things that I needed to know to be good at like other formats too, that I just simply just didn't know.
Was you're playing the best deck, but you're not playing the best deck choice for an event. And I think it's natural to gravitate towards the preconceived best deck. And to be quite honest, sometimes there isn't any other choice. We can look to tier 0 formats like tier elements, and if you're trying to figure out a meta call, it was borderline impossible. The deck was just too powerful. It had outs to every scenario. Like the only deck that could really compete toe to toe, engine to engine, was essentially the mirror. But there are a lot of formats in Yu-Gi-Oh where it isn't just dominated by one deck. And I think when I attend Premier,
I think it might be a little bit harder to make meta calls in Edison format than like he's like specifically talking about advanced format. But I do still think it's possible. Like if you're expecting like a lot of Blackwing players to be here, like let's say like this has been like a tournament you've been getting ready for a while, and you know that's going to be like 80% Blackwings, you might choose to play a deck like Hero Beat or choose to play a deck like Fairies to have a good matchup against Blackwing to kind of give you a 1-up when you're playing in the tournament.
Always try to block out as much noise as possible. Really sit down and determine which decks are good deck choices. It's time consuming. Like it's not, I'm not saying like this is something you figure out day one of like, you know, sitting stuff down. Like it's time consuming. That's what people have to understand, that when I'm sitting down trying to figure out which decks are good, I'm like trying all these decks out and understanding at a core what their pros are and what their win conditions are, what their lose conditions are, and how they fare into matchups, right? How does this deck fare into the Fire King matchup? Like how does this deck fare into the Rescue Ace matchup, right? Like does this deck have an inherent advantage against the top tier 1 decks? If so, where does it have that advantage? And is it advantage enough to carry me to a victory even though my deck is slightly weaker, right? So things like these are what you're gonna have to like think through, right? And the other important thing is that like when someone says X is good, Y is good, it's really important that you really try to determine if it's actually good or bad because of your own testing. Like
yes, this was something that I saw when Times 2 pioneered Glorious Illusion and Graganith. He was the first person to do it. A lot of people credit me with that, and it really was not me. It was Times 2. He played those cards at RBT Merino Valley, and even after he topped that event, there were so many people who were like, Graganith is bad, Glorious Illusion is bad, and they were going off of like just looking at the card and just thinking about the card rather than actually going through and doing their own testing to see whether or not the card was good or not. And I can tell you from the games that I've played, Graganith and Glorious Illusion completely changed Lightsworn forever. Like him playing those cards in his deck changed the way Lightsworn played forever, because it adds another layer to the deck. Like Lightsworn never had like a 3,000 plus piercer or played multiple Call of the Haunted to be able to get back Lumina, be able to get back Lila, so forth and so forth. And there are still some people that say those cards aren't good, but I know it's just because they haven't actually done the testing and played with the cards and saw it for themselves.
This is like really important. I think this is like the most important thing, which is like you should have like conviction when you submit a deck list for a YCS. Like it shouldn't, you know, obviously you can be a little bit nervous about the tournament and stuff like that, but you should be like, you should have your own conviction and your own like thought process. Like, hey, like I think from my own testing, I think this is good, right? And then Dave, if you don't have enough time or if you're not confident, like you can always reach out to other people to get their insight. But at the end of the day, it's you. Like you're the one that should be making the decision, right? It's kind of like I think net decking is great, and then net decking and improving on someone else's deck is even better. Taking someone else's deck but mindlessly like just submitting it is not. I think
so many people hate like net decking. And net decking is such a good tool. It's so important. Like nothing says like you can't take someone else's deck and improve on it, just like Paks said. But like just writing off net decking, there's a lot of comments on this video, negative comments, talking about stuff like net decking and how Yu-Gi-Oh is just a luck-based game. There's no skill involved. And it's like, once again, they're in the wrong mindset to get better for competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. They're in the complete wrong mindset. They're in the mindset that I was in a year ago when I was going to tournaments and going 0-5, 1-4. That's the mindset I had. My mindset is no longer like that. It's not even close to the same mindset that I had a year's time ago.
The best way to like perform. I think it can maybe get you there, but it's not like the best way to do well. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just I think if you're looking to do better, like it's not gonna get you there. Yeah, if you don't have time, then you can refer to creators that you trust or like friends for some insight. Hire a coach to maybe get you to that next step. Like a good example is like I remember like Joshua Schmidt, like he reached out to me. He was like he wasn't testing out as much, right? Because of the time constraints and all that stuff. And he asked me for my opinion on what decks I thought were good. I think this was around like maybe Euros, if I'm trying to remember. He asked me for my opinion on like the Pearly deck, and I explained to him like what my thoughts are on Pearly, its matchup, its pro, like what's some weaknesses, like what advantages does it have, all this stuff, like why I think it's actually a good pick, why I played for the last 2 events I played. And at the end of the day, Josh didn't blindly listen to me, thank God. Like, but he took it. He applied his own unique spin to it. He critically thought about what I said and if I was actually right or wrong, and ran with it, right? But like I said, at the end of the day, it's like you're making a decision, you're critically thinking. Don't just blindly follow XYZ opinion. You can ask them for their suggestions, but don't blindly follow. The last piece is about that you're adding cards to your.
I'll also tell you too, like go with your gut. Like if you know a card is good, go with your gut. A lot of people told me that Suzuki Samurai, the card that I played in my side deck at Richmond, was terrible and I shouldn't be playing it, and they didn't know why I was playing it. But I knew, like, in my heart, I knew that this card was good for what I needed it for, because I was playing Consecrated Lights and 1-for-1 for Blackwings. So it was a very good secondary 1-for-1 target that you could also Rhoda into. And that card single-handedly won me my top 8 match at Richmond.
Your deck because you like them, not because they're objectively good. And I know we're all guilty of this, okay? Like you have that one favorite card, you just got to throw in your deck, okay? Like I get that. Because when people send me decks to review, like I just find this happening all the time to the point where I kind of want to talk about it, because I have like done a lot of coaching, I have reviewed people's deck lists and stuff like that. And one of the things I would ask them is like, why are you playing that card? More often than not, the scenario people present to me is like, dude, if pigs started raining tomorrow, like you need that card for that one situation that happens maybe once every 10th moon where like the moon turns red. Like I'm just like, it's like, dude, like maybe you should take it out. And they're like, no, but I want that card. I need that card. And you know what I'm saying? Like it's like people are like emotionally attaching themselves to certain cards rather than.
This isn't such like a big deal in Edison. I don't really think people really are like necessarily attached to like a certain card in Edison. It's like, oh, I have to put this card in my deck no matter what. Sometimes Heavy Storm, people are really attached to Heavy, and like I don't think you should play Heavy in stun decks. Like I don't really think you should really be playing Heavy in a deck that like sets 5 and passes, right? Like most of the time, like you're just going to be Heavy Storming yourself. So maybe that's kind of the case here with like Heavy Storm, maybe some other cards, but most of the time, people are pretty streamlined in Edison format with their deck building. Most people.
Objectively saying, like, is this card, like, good to play in the deck? At the end of the day, all this is really saying, like, you know, rely on math instead of subjective feelings when it comes to deck building, so you don't have regrets, right? Because even if you don't misplay on a technical perspective at the YCS or at the premier event you're going to, when it comes to playing the deck, like, when it comes to building the deck, you might have misplayed there. And
I can kind of tell you a little story about kind of like the opposite of this, where it's like, I didn't include cards in my deck because of, like, I was not, like, I hated them. Like, Super Nimble Mega Hamster. I hated Hamster. Hamster was in my deck at 3 when I went 0-5. Therefore, I said I hated Hamster's card's terrible. It's not good. It's not a Lightsworn card. It's not a light monster. It's not a fairy. It doesn't go in the deck. For a year, I did not play Mega Hamster in my deck. I came up with reasons such as like, oh, well, they sure are into it. And if they don't have Kalut, then they just Icarus away your Hamster and your Raikou in your standby phase, and it doesn't do anything anyway. Where like a year later, I'm just like, you know, if you Shura into my Hamster, I've threatening roared your battle phase. Your Shura got you no value. I have a Raikou set now, and you're going to have to Icarus attack away your Shura essentially to pop one card, because the Raikou came out off the Hamster for free. So even though it is a 2-for-2, it's basically like they had to play Icarus and hit one card. Because if they don't, you just flip the Raikou and then target whatever the main threat is at the time. And then you get 3 mills as well. So Hamster is an incredibly good card in Christia Sworn for the Blackwing matchup, which is the worst matchup for Christia Sworn. So it's like in a year's time, just getting away from like the mindset of like, I hate this card, it's terrible, it's not good, to like, okay, I'm going to give this a try because I actually do think this card is good now that I'm more experienced at the game.
Might explain why you're not doing as well, right? I actually have an anecdotal example of this where after I won YCS Palo, I would say my technical play with Unchained was even better. Like I played Unchained even better at YCS Vancouver, but guess what? I didn't even top YCS Vancouver. Not because I misplayed, but because I didn't build my deck correctly. I had 45 cards in the deck for no reason, and it was off the backbone of emotion. I'm like, dude, I just won with a Unchained Soul of Disaster in my deck. How can I take this boy out? You know what I'm saying? This boy was he's my boy. You know what I'm saying? I kept him in, and I drew that card like it was my job every hand. And I lost 3 matches that event, and every match I lost was because I bricked. Every game I was able to draw even a remotely playable hand, regardless of the dice roll, I won. And guess what? I took my own advice And the YCS after in YCS Cancun, I decided to trim the fat down and made my Unchained deck 40 cards. I took out every unnecessary card, only kept in the necessary cards to play the game, to perform, and I talked because I just didn't brick it all in Swiss, and I was able to play every game. And because I knew that my technical play was very good with the deck, what I had to fix was the deck.
That was my theory. If you haven't seen my newest Christiasworn video, go check it out. Basically, it's the title of that video is I went undefeated with Christiasworn and didn't top. I went 5-0. I lost one singular game the whole day. And basically, I changed my deck to like make the meta call that I would be playing against a lot of Blackwing players. So I trimmed the fat down, as he says, took out like Glorious, took out Graganith because those cards make the Blackwing matchup worse, replaced them with cards like Hamster, and I went 5-0 at our 3v3. Unfortunately, one of my teammates didn't have the best day, so he didn't make the top cut, but I went 5-0 myself, which is like probably one of my best runs that I've had at a tournament yet. Like losing one game, one zombie player took me to game 3, and it's pretty crazy. Like just the deck building and the technical play took me such a long way that day.
Building component, which is something that goes overlooked because sometimes you will actually get sacked. Like you will definitely like get completely demolished by your opponents, but you also have to consider all the times like, okay, like if I can't control the technical play aspect, what could I have controlled? And it's important that like, you know, you're in a healthy relationship with yourself in the sense that like, you know, you control what you can. Like there's some things you will not be able to control, but the most important part about it is like just being honest with yourself, right? Like you don't need to cap.
Yeah, like sometimes you might make a card like Colossal Fighter, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna make Colossal Fighter get in for some damage, and then they end up drawing Brain Control, and you think, oh, I got sacked, but like in reality, maybe Thought Ruler Archfiend was the right card that you should have made there. You know, maybe like there are more cards in their deck that target than cards that like don't, right? Like there are more cards like D-Prison, Econ, Brain Control, stuff like that that target rather than they don't. So it's like making those reads and making those judgment calls is important. I played against 10-foot D at Richmond, and at the time I didn't know that it was him. He's really, really cool. He's super chill. I really enjoyed our match. And we got into this really weird game state where essentially, I think I had JD Christia, and he had one set back row he's playing Hero Frogs. And I kind of go over it in my head. I'm like, I can JD nuke and play around Mirror Force, but it is more likely that the set card is Regeki Break. So then he just changed Regeki Break, pops my JD, and then I'm basically Mirror Forced anyway. So there's like more of a chance. There are more copies of cards in his deck that are chainable than the one Mirror Force. So I made the read that it was probably a chainable card and just go to battle phase. It was Mirror Force, unfortunately, that took us to game 3 and end up winning in game 3. But sometimes you have to like make that decision. Like, what's the best case scenario, or what's the best play that I can do here to play around like the card he has the most likelihood of having? Like sometimes it is appropriate to play around Torrential and Mirror Force, but like in that scenario, it was just more likely that it was a chainable trap, Regeki Break, Phoenix Swing, Wind Blast. So
after anyone else, just keep it real. That's gonna conclude the video. Let me know if you agree or disagree with some of the points I made in the comment section below, and if you like additional videos explaining any of the points I mentioned above, then please let me know and subscribe. Without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next one.
Okay, so this is a really good video. It's 14 minutes. If you watch it on 1.5 speed, it's even faster. I think that literally everyone that plays Yu-Gi-Oh, regardless of how good you are or how good you think you might be, you should watch this video, because there might be information in this video that you truthfully just did not know. Like, I feel like had I watched this video a year ago, it would have like advanced me so much quicker in a year's time. Because I kind of just picked up, sorry, I'm still congested. I still just kind of picked up like little tidbits of information over the course of a year. Like some breadcrumbs here from this creator, some breadcrumbs here from this creator, so forth and so forth. And this video is just such a great starting place. Like whether you're new, returning player, or you're just trying to like up your game, like this is a good place to start. So check out this video, check out my podcast. It's called This Podcast Will Make You Good at Yu-Gi-Oh! Or This Episode Will Make You Good at Yu-Gi-Oh! Something like that. I'll link it in the description below. And yeah, guys. So I always tell people, like, if I can get better at Yu-Gi-Oh! With how bad that I was 1 year ago, then literally there's no excuse why anyone else cannot get good at Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. So thank you guys for watching. This is Mike from the Edison Club signing out until the next one.